Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to this session. I'm very, very pleased to see many of you here. I'll make a start. I'm Dina Marjoukou. I'm an associate professor at the Glasgow University and also the founder of Mindsets Group, which operates via global OneHEmindsets network. It's fantastic to see all of you here with us today. Live. We're almost fully booked actually for this session. We originally accommodated 50 participants, and I'm delighted to see so many of you because also you're coming from different places in Scotland. I've seen some of you are from Aberdeenshire, Glasgow, Dundee, St Andrews, especially, but also we have some international participants, Ireland, Greece as well. So I'm really pleased to see that our event has actually managed to really attract people from all of different backgrounds and locations. So the purpose of the showcase event is mostly to empower our young professionals and new researchers in the area of information science, librarianship, information management, but also in any related discipline that is about information, the world of information, and everything that's happening in our society these days. We want to create an open forum to share research with a wider community. And for that purpose, we're very, very pleased to have with us 4 brilliant presenters. Also, we are very delighted to have the head of CELIP in Scotland, Sean McNamara, and the CELIP Students and New Professionals community to introduce the event very shortly. But before we invite them, I'd like to give a brief introduction to who we are. The people and the organizations who have organized this event. And of course, I wanted to thank everyone for your continued interest on the basis of all the events we organize. Really, what I want to say is that at the heart of today's event is collaboration. And collaboration is twofold, is between the 3 Scottish universities here, so University of Glasgow, Napier, Edinburgh, Napier University, and Robert Gordon University. And it's really important to say that it's also collaboration, obviously, as you can see, between the Scottish Academic Libraries Cooperative Training Group and the Mindsets community. But at this point, I would like to actually start by saying a few words about the Scottish Academic Libraries Cooperative Training Group, and in fact to invite Mr. Andrew McDougall from SALCTG and the National Library in Scotland to say a few words about the organization, so what they do and how to connect, they try to connect with others. So over to you, Andrew, please.
Thanks very much, Dina. It's great to be here. My name is Andrew McDougall. I am the convener of the Scottish Academic Libraries Cooperative Training Group, or SALCTG for short. And I'm also Organisational Development Partner at the National Library of Scotland. SALCTG has been a feature of the library world in Scotland for quite a while now, possibly as long as 30 years. But we're looking to move in new directions. We have always supported training events for academic library staff, but we're increasingly looking at career development and finding new ways to reach out to and to connect with library staff, including visits, digital visits, network building, and showcases for research. So really, really delighted to be collaborating with so many other great organisations to make events like this happen. So please do keep an eye out on our blog for future events and other things that will be happening. That's about it from me. Really looking forward to hearing our speakers, and I will pass back to Dina, I think, and let you take it from there, Dina. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Unfortunately, I have some background noise today behind me. I hope it's not really disturbing everybody. For some reason, they have decided to do some works here. So very, very quickly then cover really what OneHEmindsets is doing as well, which is the other organization that collaborates with CTG as well. And I wanted to say about OneHEmindsets that we are called the Information, Digital and Media Literacy Organization, which is really what I would call a network for everyone, but mainly for students And we're trying to really empower this kind of creative collaboration with students in terms of their lifelong development of skills that relate to information, digital and media literacy. So for this session, I would say that I see the session connected to information literacy mostly, because that empowers individuals and the society with skills and abilities to use information, to discover, access, interpret, analyze, I would say manage, communicate that information. And research is all about that. And so I've given here the link to join our free community if you want it. I think I could post this into the chat as well for everyone if they wanted to join. And really, this is about the community, but we are a number of people. And today we have several people from the committee of Mindsets with us. We've got Helen and Kerstin looking after the chat area. We've got Amanda on the social media. So it's lovely to actually collaborate. And I should say that Kerstin and Amanda are librarians at the Glasgow University. So ultimately, we have a brilliant collaboration here of several universities working together in this collaborative partnership today. So it's brilliant to have everybody. However, I should say that an online event is not an online event without some audience participation. And so what I would like to do is invite everyone who is here today, not only to introduce themselves in the chat area, which is really important. So tell us a little bit about who you are, why you joined this session, and all of that. And then after this, please share with us in a sentence, research you have already done, research you are currently doing, or research you would like to do in the future. And towards the end of the session, or if we have a little break in the middle of the session, we'll be able to share those ideas, and who knows, we may find some joint interesting research directions and can all work together. So the code is 59863896 www.menti.com. I hope you all have it here. I don't know if you wanted me to add it in the code in the chat area. So 59863896. Right. So with that, hopefully you've all got it now. I'm going to move to my next slide, where I am very pleased to welcome Son McNamara, Head of CLIPS. I have the privilege to have Son with us to introduce the event and talk about the importance of research. And also following Son, we have CLIPS students and new professionals community. Dana Copeland coming from the community to talk about the purposes of CLIPS students and new professionals. And so, Son, are you with us? Can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I welcome Son. Over to you to really what we wanted is your view about why research is important in this area. A few ideas, and then that will give us more food for thought as well. So over to you, Son.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me at the Student Research Showcase. Looking forward to welcoming along all the speakers and hearing all the presentations, because I think that for me is the key to why research is so important. Both the ability to share it and for us to use it at CLIPS, because research underpins a lot of what we do. So as Dina said, I'm Sean McNamara, Head of CLIP in Scotland. I assume most of you will know who we are, but if not, we are the membership body for library workers across Scotland and information professionals across Scotland. A lot of what we've always done has been about supporting our members, sharing members' stories and members' work, but also providing professional development and training and different things around that. A big part of what has taken over in our work a lot of the time is our advocacy and campaigning work, highlighting the value of librarians and libraries or information services to wider society. And that is why research has become so important to us. Research and what it produces is vital to making that case for libraries. We can't just rely on people knowing that library services are good just because they're there. And you can't just rely on number of visits or things like that. You have to have more to it. So what research helps us do is make that case by proving some of the value around libraries. And one of the things over the years that we've relied on is other organisations doing research, or LIS students or practitioners or people working out in the field who are undertaking research that we can then learn from and apply. To that end, one of the things that our board felt a couple of years ago was that perhaps we needed more research that was targeted on particular areas. So last year we launched the first £10,000 research fund, and we're delighted to offer funding both to the University of Glasgow to set up a toolkit around using ethics for advocacy, and the Glasgow Women's Library, who are doing a research project around libraries and their role in activism. Again, this year, we have another £10,000 available. So if anyone here would be interested in applying for that, I'll put the link in the chat, and you can apply for up to £10,000 for a research project that is related to advocacy. And all that is because it's vital that LIS professionals like yourselves continue doing innovative research that can lead to great new initiatives, can have a real impact on the sector. It really is vital, whether that be at master's level, postgrad level, any level. It's still important because it provides a real underpinning of what we do. But the key to that is also sharing it. So it's going to be great today. I'll hear about things that perhaps I've not heard about before, and we can then think about how we can use that. But if you're not one of the featured speakers here today and you would like to share any kind of piece of research that you'd like to share with us, please do get in touch. My contact details are there. We'd love to share it either via a blog, or we've got our New Voices blog, or we have regular online events or conferences. So don't be shy. If you feel that if you've done a bit of research, let us know about it, because in one way or another we'll be able to use it. So from this point, I'm just going to pass over now to a wonderful part of our wider community at SILPS, which is the Students and New Professionals community, which was set up a few years ago. It's a fantastic community that do incredible events. There's a lot coming up, which Dana will tell you about. So I'll now pass over to Dana Copeland, who will tell you all about that. Thank you.
Oh, thanks very much, Sean. I think
apologies, Dana, just to say that whenever you need me to change your slides, I'm more than happy to do. Thank you.
Oh, perfect. I've requested like a wee control of it, but yeah, that's perfect as well. If we could just go to the next one, that'd be great. Yeah, so who are we? So as Sean pointed out, we started a few years ago. It was basically myself and a bunch of other people just about to graduate into the at the time terrifying world of the pandemic, and we thought students and new professionals community would be great. So very thank you for having us here to talk to you about it, because obviously you guys are just doing your fantastic research and you're all going to be new professionals, or you're going to continue studying, and this is the community for you. So basically we're a space to kind of network for those new to working and studying in the library and information world. And well, as a way to kind of advocate for you guys, like we can speak to kind of, groups like this, wider SILPS groups, wider SILP groups, and just kind of be a wee voice for the students and new professionals, just giving that connection and peer support. And we also put on loads of events that are both social, just to let you meet other information professionals, as well as like actually professional development work. So this is kind of a space to share our experiences. And Sean also mentioned the New Voices blog, which we always really advocate for people to be adding to, put your voice out there. You are the profession, and just really make use of that space. Next slide, please. So yeah, this is our committee, a friendly bunch of faces, but also we're always really happy to have more people on board. So myself and our main secretary Marta, we've all been in the profession now for a few years, so we're really happy to make this a continually new committee. We want to make sure that we're not just hogging the mic, so all of the other people are current students, so hopefully we can kind of get more students involved and more new professionals involved. So as it says at the bottom there, we're supported by SILPS, and we welcome anybody who identifies as an aspiring or early career information professional. So if that's you, please kind of give us a wee email, give us a wee shout out on Twitter and get involved. Next slide, please. So yeah, I mentioned the New Voices, the blog managed by us and hosted on the SALCTG website. It's a space for new professionals to share their perspectives. So you can, as Sean mentioned, like share your research, you can share your experience of job hunting, you can give a wee kind of review, just anything that you think is interesting. Likelihood is you're not the only one thinking it, and the wider profession would love to see it. So we have a case study template if that's something you would prefer to follow a structure, but if not, just whatever you want to do. So as it says at the bottom, you can email us at snpc@salctg.org.uk or get us on Twitter as well. Next slide, please. We also have a useful hub of resources and useful links on the SALCTG SNP website, again, hosted by SALCTG. So just to kind of give you a bit of more insight about the LIS landscape, where to look for jobs, training, CPD, just kind of strategies and things going on in the wider community that you want to be aware of, as well as funding options and other names to know. So obviously everyone here knows about SALCTG and SALCTG, but other things like, and also you obviously know about SALCTG, but wider organisations like that you want to kind of find out about. Next slide, please. So as Sean mentioned, we've had loads of events. So since we started, we wanted to really make sure that we were providing useful content and useful events for our kind of wider community. So our first ever event was an online careers workshop with the wonderful Heather Marsher from GCU. And that kind of gave tips and tricks for writing CVs and applications and all your interviews. We've got all of the recordings available on our website from all of our events. So we've had a slew of other ones since then, but that was our first one. And that's kind of the vein we wanted to keep it in, of just really being a priority for students and new professionals. We've also hosted loads of informal networking, including bookish quizzes. Last year we had an event, or so 2 years ago, Chartership, what is it? And I know we're interested in doing another one of those because it's such a big buzzword, but a lot of students aren't really clued up on the process. We also want to make sure that people from public libraries to prison libraries to health libraries to the wide and wonderful world, just because a lot of the times in student classes you're really focused on the main ones, but there might be other ones that are really well suited to you. So we try and get in a wide variety of voices to show you the beauty of the wider profession. The next slide, please. So our upcoming event, which obviously we're here to try and recruit you to come to, is Saturday morning, 11 AM, an online event, a Q&A with the SALCTG Vice President, Sue Williamson, MBE. So that's just going to be us talking to her with your questions of how it is working with the public library just now. Obviously, the wider kind of public services are under a wee bit of attack. So just getting an insight into how people in public libraries now are finding it, how you want to get into it, experience you want, that kind of thing. So it looks to be a really, really good event. So please sign up and bring your questions and a cup of tea. And yeah, that'll be a really nice way to start your weekend. Next slide, please. And yeah, so if you want to know more about us, you can follow us on Twitter. We also have an Instagram now, which is an exciting 2023 development. And we highlight job vacancies all the time. So if you're looking for training or jobs, that's something we really try and flag up and just kind of fill your feed with as much as we can. As well, if any of you are finishing your research and you want that publicised, you've got dissertation surveys, anything like that, we're always happy to kind of shout you from the rooftops and just kind of celebrate your achievements and your experiences. So yeah, that should be the last slide. But
yes, thank you
might be
so
the one.
much. That's fantastic. And I think you have
Very
a
fun.
last one about keeping in touch.
Yes, so absolutely. So please see those links there if you would like to kind of get to know more about us, or as I was saying, if any of you are interested in kind of joining the committee, we're always looking for new faces.
That's
So,
brilliant. Thank you so much.
thanks very much,
Dana.
guys.
Thank you. That's fantastic. And an interesting event coming up. We heard about research opportunity from Son as well. So lots of ideas and thinking about follow-up research opportunities. Excellent. So thank you for this brilliant introduction. So now we will start, obviously, with our first presenter. So today we have 4 brilliant presenters. And we're very, very pleased to have with us really great speakers to talk about the research. What you will find is that we have people in different stages of research. So some have already completed it, some are currently undertaking it, and others are at the very start Also, you will see that the presenters can be at master's level or at doctoral level, and from different types of courses. So it's not only necessary within information science or library-related courses, but also beyond that to the courses that research areas that have intersections and connections and are of interest to us as well. So we wanted to capture all of these elements. So we hope these topics will be of interest to students, researchers, practitioners who may be here in this event today. So we'll start with our first presenter, Hye Lim Nam. Hi, welcome, Joy. The presentation is on exploring scholarly mental models and information behavior in disciplinary contexts, as you can see here. Joy is in the second year of her PhD at the University of Glasgow. It's a collaboration between the University of Glasgow and Bodleian Libraries, the University of Oxford. Joy completed an MA in Transcultural Studies in Heidelberg, Germany, actually, and worked in the European Molecular Biology Laboratory as a library and archive assistant. So that experience led her to pursue an MSc Information Management and Preservation at the University of Glasgow. So her current PhD study is on this topic, as you can see here, but also Joy is interested in library UX, information behavior, and mental models. So over to you, Joy, to talk about exploring scholarly mental models and information behavior in disciplinary contexts. And please do let me know to change your slides, of course. So over to you, Joy.
Thank you, Dina. Please take my picture down. Okay, thank you. So as Dina already explained, I'm a PhD student at the University of Glasgow, and I'm working on a collaborative project with Bodleian Libraries at the University of Oxford. And today I've titled my talk, Exploring Scholarly Mental Models in Information, Behavior, and Disciplinary Context, but I'm also going to, Dina, if you could just go to my next slide, please. I'm going to tell you a bit more about my background and what led me to my current research project, and tell you a bit about the themes that run throughout my research, talk briefly about my master's dissertation topic, which was about GeoCities, and then my current doctoral project. Next slide, please. So Dina already said all of this, but let me go over it quickly. But I had a brief stint for about a year from 2019 to 2020 at the cusp of, the pandemic, working as a library and archive assistant at the European Molecular Biology Laboratory in Heidelberg, Germany. And they were just starting with their digital preservation efforts, obviously with the pandemic and all of that. It became a bigger topic. So I became interested in digital preservation and I wanted to work in archives. So I decided, because the archivist that I was working with had done her master's in the UK, I thought, why not go to the UK and do it? So I did a Master's of Science course in Information Management and Preservation at the University of Glasgow, with intention of working in an archive. And my dissertation topic was about looking into how the GeoCities web archive was used by different groups of people. And after that, I actually found out about an interesting PhD project involving the study of library users. Applied for that, was accepted. So then that's how I ended up researching disciplinary differences across different research or academic library users. Next slide, please. So I'm really preaching to the choir here, but I'm just going to go over some of the, some basic terms that really drive my research. So one of my interests is information behavior, or information related behavior, as some people who don't like the grammar of that term might say. And that is basically referring to the ways in which people interact with information. It could be intentional, unintentional, negative behaviors, averting, trying not to look at different kinds of information or misinformation, that kind of thing. Also, it refers to contexts in which people deal with information and navigate their information environments. And that takes into account situation, time, affect, culture, geography, and other contextual elements in people's information, affecting people's information behaviors. Next slide, please. Another area of interest of mine is the study of users, which is kind of self-explanatory, but it's really trying to investigate the information needs, seeking, and information behaviors in general of users. And it also looks at the broader relationships between users, information resources, and information systems. And The way that I approach the study of users is thinking about users as having different kinds of needs, physiological, affective, cognitive, which are interrelated, and also the notion that information needs and use arise out of different social and organizational contexts and roles, I find important. Next slide, please. And related to that, I'm also interested in library UX, which is a collection of techniques derived from ethnography, usability, and service design that is meant to, lead to evidence-based change in libraries. It's a toolkit for investigating how users experience libraries, and it tries to construct a holistic and detailed picture of the lives of users. So it's really a framework for libraries to listen, understand, and learn from its users to understand why, when, how they do things. Next slide, please. So I'm going to jump into my master's dissertation topic, which was titled The Afterlives of GeoCities, Exploring the GeoCities Archive in Relation to Access and Use. And the purpose of the study was to explore user needs, expectations, perceptions, and modes of interaction with the GeoCities Web Archive. And the key questions that drove this research was, how has GeoCities been preserved? How has the process of its preservation and management shaped access and use? And how has historical web content, and specifically GeoCities in this case, been used or not used by different groups of users, including historians, artists, and others, and why? Next slide, please. So what was the GeoCities Archive? For those of you who don't know what GeoCities is, it was a free web hosting platform that started in 1994. It was bought up by Yahoo in 1999, and it shut down about a decade later in 2009. And it gave users 15 megabytes to create their own websites, which doesn't seem like a lot today, but it was a lot back then. And it was really popular in the 1990s, but then MySpace and Facebook and other social media platforms popped up and kind of stopped being used as much. And so Yahoo decided to terminate GeoCities in 2009. But in the months leading up to October 2009, when it shut down, a group of volunteers called the archive team saved about 8 terabytes of the GeoCities pages. Essentially, it was a group of dozens of volunteers around the world who were like, this content is precious, it's our history, our collective web history. So started downloading a bunch of things, a bunch of websites, and they managed to save about a tenth of what is estimated to have been there. And the archive team released their web scrape as a compressed torrent, which is a form of peer-to-peer file sharing. And what they released was 652 gigabytes, and they made it available for everyone to download, but that's a lot even today. So if anyone wanted to use it, they really needed a lot of space and a lot of time to download that. Eventually, the Internet Archive came to host the GeoCities files, and they also had their own special collection containing their own crawls of GeoCities sites. So that was GeoCities. Next slide, please. And I found various artistic and research projects based on the GeoCities archive contents. The screenshot that you see on this slide and the slide before are from cameronsworld.net, which I recommend you check out because it's really fun. It's like a collage of different GIFs and images and sparkly things and, MIDI files from the 1990s. So it's kind of fun. You just scroll down endlessly. And there were other projects called the Deleted City, the GeoCities MIDI Archive, GIF Cities, 1 terabyte of kilobyte age photo op. So these were either databases that made the content accessible or were creative projects, that created by artists. Next slide, please. So the method of the study was an evaluation of the GeoCities archive against existing access standards. So the National Archives Digital Preservation Workflow, DPC's Handbook, and the Digital Library Federation's Levels of Born Digital Access. And I also conducted interviews with GeoCities archive users, some of whom I mentioned in the previous slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Basically, what I found was that the GeoCities archive falls short of the current access standards. I mean, it was a volunteer project where a bunch of people were downloading on various devices, just contents from the website. So it was kind of ad hoc. So it wasn't that surprising. But existing interfaces and creative projects still offered multiple points of entry for anyone interested in exploring what GeoCities was like. And the interviewees reported facing significant technical challenges whilst working with the geostudies collection, and they had to adjust their information needs and behaviors and their research according to the affordances of the medium and the archive's contents. And based on what they said, and based on my own exploration of the site and my evaluation of the archive compared with the access standards, the recommendations consisted of promoting the archive's contents, enabling discovery, making the data adhere to standardized file formats. Standardization was something that was lacking. Building more comprehensive interfaces, and providing tutorials or guides for working with the data. And next slide, please. Okay, now, sorry for talking so quickly and going over the master's thing, but I'll jump down to what I'm doing now. And my project is titled, it's a mouthful, Mental Models of the Organization of Scholarly Information Across the Academy, Disciplinary Similarities and Differences. The purpose of this project is to investigate the mental models that researchers at the University of Glasgow and the University of Oxford have of the structure and organization of knowledge in their own disciplines, and to explore what that might mean, what kind of impact that might have upon researchers' approaches to searching for literature. Next slide, please. Where did this project come from? The origins stem from research data that was gathered by the Bodleian Libraries that suggested that a certain subgroup of researchers, specifically historians, approach information seeking in a distinct way to other researchers in other disciplines. And the question that led to this project was why? How do disciplines shape information behavior? And can researchers' mental models of the structure and organization of knowledge in their own fields, how they think about knowledge, how, just the ways of thinking that are taught and shaped by the discipline, the disciplinary community, can trying to understand that and tap into researchers' mental models help us better understand their motivations and expectations of lab research and discovery. And just a quick aside here. By mental models, I mean a concept that derived from psychology and cognitive science that refers to an internal mental representation of the external world that people develop and use to interact with the world. So it can be like a machine or a computer or an interface or the internet, and how you think about that, how that works in your mind. So it's essentially a cognitive structure that helps with decision-making, reasoning, and information-related behaviors as well. Next slide, please. So existing literature is focused more on broad generalizations and universal sort of models that can apply to any individual. So in the 1980s, there was Marcia Bates's berry picking model, or Tom Wilson's model, Derwin's sense-making framework. These are general models of how people approach information seeking. The bottom three are scholarly models of information seeking. So on the bottom left is Ellis's investigation of social scientist behaviors. In the bottom middle section is Unsworth's categorization of basic activities of humanities scholars. And then on the bottom right is Coulter's information search process, which was an investigation of students in general. Next slide, please. Other studies, there were many other studies, but I'll mention two big series of studies. One was conducted from 2007 to 2011 by the Research Information Network. They commissioned 3 reports on the information practices of UK scholars in the life sciences, the humanities, and the physical sciences. And this was a comparative project, but it was from over 10 years ago. And from 2012 to 2020, Ithaca Sonar kind of took on the baton and produced a series of reports that examine more North America-based scholarly practices in 10 different disciplines. They're listed on the slide here. And it was somewhat comparative, but they're very much focused on trying to understand the specificities of a specific subject. So it wasn't that comparative. And these studies shed light on behavioral patterns and scholarly perceptions, but didn't really focus on the why scholars might seek and use information, resources, and systems in the ways that they reported doing. And so it was missing explanatory power. Next slide, please. So my current PhD project is a comparative exploration of 4 different disciplines: chemistry, history, law, and medicine. These were selected because I was trying to find comparative subjects in Oxford and in Glasgow because they're organized differently in terms of the organizational structure. Glasgow has colleges like the College of Arts, and Oxford has divisions. So there's the non-medical, there's the medical, there's social sciences and humanities, but there are different disciplines that fit in different categories in both locations. So these are sort of the 4 disciplines that I found might be comparable. And my study is drawing from library UX and ethnography inspired techniques, specifically cognitive mapping and semi-structured interviews to elicit mental models. And it's hoped that the results of the study will help improve the information-seeking experiences of scholars by ensuring that library search systems take into account the expectations and assumptions or mental models of users across disciplines. And currently the study is in the data collection phase. I've conducted 2 pilot studies in Glasgow, and I'm going to Oxford soon to interview more scholars there. And yeah, that is everything. I think my final slide is a thank you for listening. Any questions, comments would be welcome.
Thank you so much, Joy. Very interesting presentation, especially how you moved from your master's into the PhD. I think some of our participants may relate to that experiences. So please do add your questions in either the chat, or you may want to ask them using your microphone. It's up to you. Do we have any questions from the audience for Joy? I wanted to really kick off like question process if possible. You mentioned a number of models, obviously very big models, Wilson's model, Ellis's, Courtho's. I was just thinking in terms of utilizing any of those models, is it going to involve some of these models? Are you involved with this as a conceptual framework or as a way of asking questions, perhaps, your participants? Maybe tell us a little bit more about the methodology.
The methodology is going to be purely qualitative, and I'm hoping that it's going to be more of a bottom-up approach, so not necessarily trying to read into the data and apply those models, but I just wanted to have that in the back of my mind. You know, there's previous research that has been done on how scholars seek information, but I'm going to try to let the data and the interviews speak for themselves and see what's going on the ground now.
That's great. And anyway, you're really sort of, you know, not even halfway through the PhD. So I think that, you know, this is a very natural process of the first, you know, trying to experience and understand what's going on, especially if it's a qualitative data study. We do have a question from Helen, and the question relates actually, I think, to your master's research on GeoCities and the archive there. And the question is, what made you want to look at this process and GeoCities specifically, Joy?
I never had one, although I'm old enough to have had one. And I think I was reminded of it through a podcast called 99% Invisible. It's an excellent design podcast, but they were mentioning that there was an online community called GeoCities, and it reminded me that had existed. And then I was curious to see what was still remaining of it. And then I found these different projects, and I found out about the archive team. So it was very much just chance, really. But finding out that there was an archive made me interested, from, you know, coming from a master's in archiving, basically. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. And the final question is, do you have any advice for students moving from master's to PhD research?
I think you don't really need a PhD, so it should be something that you really enjoy, that really interests you, because I find that I feel like I'm floating by myself and like just talking to myself in my own head a lot of the times. So if I didn't have monthly meetings with my supervisors and kind of a PGR community in Glasgow, it would be rough. So you really need to love the topic, I think, and have like a passion for research. Yeah, I don't think it's for everyone, but if it's an interesting subject, then why not?
I definitely think this is a very valuable advice for sure, because PhD experience can be quite an isolating experience for many people. So having a community there is really important, but also have passion for research and the topic. Go for a topic you really are interested in. So thank you so much, Joy. That was brilliant. I know you have to leave a little bit earlier, so but if anyone is interested, I'm sure they can maybe speak to you and maybe come up with some follow-up questions if they haven't really thought of them just now. All right, so thank you so much, Joy, for this starting presentation. So now we are going to move on to our second presenter. I'm very pleased to invite Chloe Hartley. So Chloe has studied at the Robert Gordon University, has studied the MSc Information and Library Studies. And this topic will be on love libraries, hashtags, and folksonomies in public library Instagram accounts. And I should say a few things about Chloe. Chloe grew up in the Lake District and moved to York for her undergraduate degree. And then a few years later, studied the master's degree in library science, and now is living back at the lakes. She works for a Japanese bioplastics company and enjoys exploring the ferns and pottering around the garden in her spare time. I should also mention that here at Robert Gordon University, we have the Reflective Professional Journal. So it's a student-led journal. And we have been working on this now, it's the third year. And Chloe's dissertation as part of the MSc Information Library Studies have been selected to be published. We would be interested in expanding beyond library studies as well. So this year we have added data analytics work and research. So we're very much looking forward to actually seeing that published, and it will be out in June. So Chloe, are you with us? Over to you.
Thank you, Dina. And welcome everyone to my presentation. This is on my my research project, hashtag love libraries, hashtags and folksonomies in public library Instagram accounts. So I'll start by giving a little bit of background as to how I kind of chose my topic. It might be of interest to people who are, you know, about to go into their writing their dissertation, or if you're having to write a proposal. I know it can feel difficult trying to kind of grasp at straws, trying to think of something to write about. So basically, for a little bit of context, when just before I was writing my proposal, I was studying my master's full-time distance learning. I had just started a new job, and my son was 1 year old. So I didn't really have, I wanted to write something about something that I was kind of interested in and passionate about, but I didn't really have interests or passions at the time, aside from, you know, like showering alone and getting more than 4 hours sleep in one night. That is aside from kind of every night, I'd go to bed and I'd maybe mindlessly scroll on Instagram for 5 minutes, and that was all of my me time. So in terms of, and this makes me sound like a profoundly boring person, I promise that I'm not, but that was kind of all I had going on at the time. The course was, as Dina said, I studied distance learning, and it was kind of all consuming, doing it in a year. But as a part of the course, we, on Campus Moodle, we would have discussions for every module. So they provided a lot of inspiration. I think it was, which module was it? I think it was knowledge organization, where we were kind of just chatting casually about indexing. And then I can't remember if it was myself or somebody else, or somebody said like, well, that's really cool because like hashtagging is essentially like user-generated indexing. I think that's what was said. And we kind of all got a little bit excited about that. And then our tutor, Alan McLennan, kind of cut in and kindly informed us that it is very much a thing. It's established. It's called a folksonomy. And I found that really interesting. And that was quite early on in the course, but I was like, you know what, I think that's something that I might end up wanting to write about. So maybe I'll come back to that. And so when it came to the time that I was trying to decide, I was writing my proposal, I was like, okay, let's go back to this whole folksonomy thing and read a little bit more about that. So Dina, if you could just go to the next slide for me, please. So the term folksonomy was originally coined by Thomas van der Waal on a blog post, quite appropriately. And he defined it as the people's taxonomy, where users take ownership of categorizing information or content for their own use. So, I mean, it doesn't necessarily have to be, it doesn't have to have a hashtag symbol, but, the resulting hashtags could be called a folksonomy. And this quote by Trant here kind of shows that definition between like the process, which is tagging, and then the folksonomy is the resulting collective vocabulary. And I found it really interesting. It kind of struck a chord with me. I found it to be really like punk, for lack of a better word. And I think that's been picked up on academically as well. Weinberger called folksonomies an anti-authoritarian symbol, and I just found it to be, really interesting. And I thought pairing that with, public libraries, what could be more punk than that? So that seemed like a really obvious thing to do. So if you could just go on to the next slide, please, Dina. So once I decided that I wanted to use these kind of 3 focuses, so that was Instagram, folksonomies, and public libraries, then I started doing some reading. And the best place for me to start was Libraries in Lockdown and Libraries Lockdown and Looking Ahead. They were 2 kind of key texts because at the time, COVID, I mean, and obviously in the grand scheme of things, COVID is still very fresh. But we were just kind of coming out of lockdown, and I was really interested in the impact that lockdown had, because obviously public libraries, the physical space is such an important aspect. So to be stripped of that, I wanted to know what these libraries were doing. And those 2 texts, the Libraries in Lockdown and Libraries Lockdown and Looking Ahead, they were a really, really good place for me to start in terms of indicating what libraries were up to. And they basically both said what I wanted them to say, which was there was a huge uptake in social media usage by public libraries out of necessity, really, in COVID. So I found that very reassuring because it was, I could see it forming, that there was this gap there for me to conduct this research on. And so I started thinking about, looking at Instagram posts from public libraries, and then reading about, things that I would want to tie into my research. So obviously hashtags I was really interested in. So I started asking that question, like, how do you define hashtags? How do you characterize them? And stuff like that. And so the other 2 key texts that I found on the screen, so that's likes, comments, views, a content analysis of academic library Instagram posts. And when I found that gives a coding schema for different types of Instagram posts. And I was like simultaneously elated, but also, for lack of a better word, kind of bummed out, because I started to question if I had any, original or unique thoughts, because I was like, I wanted to create this coding schema. These people have already done it. And so I kind of ran to my supervisor, Rita Marcella, who was absolutely great and brought me back down to earth many a time. And she kind of spanned my perspective on it a little bit and was like, Chloe, this is a great thing, because just because they've done it doesn't mean that you can't. You can actually take their work and adapt it for your purposes. And I liked that a lot. That made me feel a lot better about the whole thing. So I took their coding schema and I took the coding schema from rhetorical functions of hashtag forms across social media applications. They had a coding schema for types of hashtags rather than types of post. And I took both of those and then adapted them for my own needs, but I will cover the coding schemas themselves a little bit further down the line. So Dina, could you please skip to the next slide? Okay, so I'm conscious that I'm already waffling, so I will try and be quick. In terms of methodology, with the focus of the study being on language and more specifically folksonomies and online communities, I deemed the most appropriate approach to be interpretivism, as this adopts a qualitative design with a focus on hermeneutics in the form of discourse analysis and semiotics. And I already knew what I wanted to do. I already knew that I wanted to kind of go on Instagram, see what was already happening, see what hashtags were being used by library accounts, and then collaborate somehow with a library in implementing these, coming up with like a coding schema of my own, and then issuing hashtags for them to use. And I mean, my original plan was that I wanted to work with the library and do like a complete social media takeover, which obviously did not pan out. In hindsight, it's like, yes, of course, that wasn't gonna work, but I managed to compromise. But yes, so this kind of observing and then action taking falls really nicely into the I can't think of the word now. The action research cycle, sorry, it's on the screen there. It's this little one with the diagnosing action planning. And that's from Baskerville's action research cycle. And he actually splits it into two definitive phases. So that's the diagnostic phase where you kind of passively observe, and then you would take it to the therapeutic phase, which is where you would do the kind of action taking and then evaluating. And that cycle can be repeated as many times as you need to based on your findings. So that kind of fit the bill really nicely, and it fit directly into what I knew I wanted to do. And then for looking at the diagnosing phase, I kind of discovered ethnography. It's kind of like a version of ethnography, and it's passive ethnography is, you know, just kind of unobtrusively looking at activities online in online communities. So I knew that I was going to want to use that for the diagnosing phase, so that was a big influence. Dina, if you could just skip to the next slide, thank you. So to boil it down to the most basic I can possibly boil it, my research objectives were to identify leading examples of Instagram library accounts, and then to analyze the use of their hashtags, to create the coding schemas, which, I mean, I've already said I kind of sneakily took other people's, but, you know, hey, if the shoe fits. Yeah, so to create the coding schemas and to categorize both Instagram posts and hashtags used, and then from that to create tailored hashtags from the primary data collection to issue through to a collaborative library service, and then to, as per that kind of action research cycle, to just examine whether or not there's been a success or a failure in that. So yeah, at this stage, to keep you all in suspense, I can neither confirm nor deny whether these things happened, and you'll have to hang around till the end. Dina, if you could skip to the next slide, thank you. Oh, and so here's the coding schemas that I ended up coming up with. And yeah, I should point out that these aren't conclusive. These aren't, you know, these did the job for me. But as I was kind of collecting my data, I did identify perhaps some gaps there. I mean, you can ultimately kind of place all your post types into that coding schema. A really obvious one that I didn't use was I came across a lot of like, how would you call it? So posts when, like, for example, I collected data and Eric Carle, the author of the hungry caterpillar, the very hungry caterpillar, he passed away. So there were lots of like tribute posts to him. And it was a surprisingly popular kind of type of post that I just didn't, from my kind of brief looking on Instagram, I didn't take that into account. And so I committed to not having that, but then it played quite a big part. And so I just kind of had to categorize that elsewhere. And that happened with a few things, but you know, you live, you learn. And if I was to conduct another action research cycle, then I would 1000% adapt these coding schemas again to be more conclusive. Dina, if you could skip again, please. Thank you. Okay, so the diagnostic phase. So as I mentioned earlier, the diagnostic phase centered around the identification of leading examples of library accounts on Instagram. And initially I did think about just doing public library accounts, but to just get a kind of richer data set, we decided to just cover all sorts. And to decide on these accounts, I used the classic lazy girl method, where I literally just Googled best Instagram accounts, library Instagram accounts, and then I found this BuzzFeed article that you can see on screen, and that provided me with a bunch of really good recommendations. So I took some from there. I kind of cherry picked a few myself. I think like Liverpool, University of Liverpool Library, and what else? I can't remember. But yeah, I kind of mixed it up a little bit just so that we had a mix of national, public, and academic libraries. And I decided, due to the time constraints, because all of this was happening quite fast, that I would take 10 posts from each service, so 100 posts in total, and they would be collected prior to a designated date, so that I didn't have to rely on, you know, them posting in any kind of regularity. All the posts would already be there. So in pursuit of generating quantitative data, the categories of data types to record were determined as hashtags used, number of likes, number of comments, number of hashtags, the like percentage, which was calculated as the number of likes out of the total follower count, and the post category. These fields were chosen due to their public availability. It basically meant that I could just go onto any Instagram account, see what was there. I did not need to use like a private analytics kind of system. It's all there and readily available, which in terms of the time constraints just made it a lot easier. In terms of video posts, I decided that because every post was featured in my dissertation, and I can't obviously put a video in paper, so I would just screenshot it, but the kind of the message of the whole video would be what determines how it was categorized as a post. Another thing for video posts that I decided was that on Instagram, for another person's video posts, you can't see the amount of likes, you can only see the amount of views. And I made the decision to make that like for like, no pun intended. And well, I'll discuss it in a little bit, but it was potentially a bit of a mistake. And it skewed the data a little bit, but yeah. Dina, could you please skip to the next slide? Thank you. Okay, so from the findings from the diagnostic phase. So at this point, I'm just going to reel off some numbers at you. Of the 100 posts, a total of 794 hashtags were applied. The highest recorded on a single post was 24, with 9 posts choosing not to attach hashtags at all, which, I mean, 9 posts out of 100 is quite a high percentage, which is quite damning in terms of me trying to promote hashtags. But it was interesting, at least. The total number of likes accumulated came to 75,700, of which the highest found on a post was 13,691. That was a video and they were views, but you know, in terms of making it black and white, I had to take those as likes. And the lowest amount of likes on a single post was 13. The highest like to follower percentage recorded in the data was 11.8%, which is pretty big. And the total number of comments weighed in at considerably less than the likes, which was to be expected because the convenience of liking a post is so much easier than having to comment, and a lot of the time comments are just emojis, but it's still to think of, to have to think of what to say or what to put. It's not half as easy as just pressing a button. So that was expected. Of the comments, 58 comments with the highest volume of comments on one post, which is really successful as far as I could tell. And 35 of the posts, so over 30% of them, just didn't have any comments at all. The most frequently occurring category of post was showcasing, which was closely followed by humanizing. And yeah, so that's really concurrent with what I expected from library services. To want to showcase what they've got is a really kind of clear and obvious strategies for them to take. So yeah, that was absolutely expected. In terms of the hashtag category used, the identifying type constituted for the most in every post category aside from interacting. That identifying is quite a broad type, and like I said, if I was to revisit this, I would probably create some kind of sub categories that you could put different types of identifying hashtags in. So this was evidenced in the top recurring hashtags identified. So if you see table 5, looking at library Instagram accounts, naturally the most often used hashtag is going to be library. So you've got library, libraries of Instagram, library life. Obviously the theme of libraries, it's very popular. And then you get quite a lot of what I refer to as branding hashtags as well. So they're hashtags that specifically refer to your library service without any kind of interference of being like emotive or rallying or anything like that. So ultimately, these kind of hashtags that you can see on screen here in table 5, that they formed the action strategy for the therapeutic stage. Dina, if you could just skip on for me. Thank you. So the therapeutic stage, I was fortunate enough to be hashtag blessed by Orkney when they agreed to collaborate with me in this. So they agreed that I could issue hashtags to them and they would apply them to their posts. I tried to be as unobtrusive in this as possible. It's obviously quite an obtrusive thing, but I basically said to them, look, you just post as normal. I will create a kind of framework for you to follow. But before I could do that, I had to take a small sample of what they already had on Instagram and just make sure that it wasn't going to conflict with whatever I was going to recommend to them, because that would, I think, obviously users are still experiencing this and I didn't want anything to be too jarring to the users. So from that small sample, the results showed that Orkney's pre-existing hashtag strategy was very much in keeping with the results from the diagnostic data set, and evidenced to an extent that they would have their kind of go-to hashtags that they would always apply, and then individual hashtags that they would circumstantially apply depending on what they have uploaded. So because of this, I decided that for the framework, I would do the same. I would have generic hashtags that they would apply to every single post, and then they would have specific hashtags depending on each post category. So yes, could you just skip to the next? Thank you. Right, so the findings from the therapeutic phase. A correlation was found between the amount of likes and hashtags on a post within the therapeutic dataset, with Orkney Library's 3 most liked posts also being those in the dataset with the highest volume of hashtags. Now, as a rule, I wouldn't say that just slapping on loads of hashtags is going to get you loads of likes. There's a reason why people tend not to do it. But interestingly, the data showed that in this circumstance, that was a signifier of success. Another consistent aspect between all 3 datasets was the most frequently occurring post category, all of which returned showcasing type posts to be the most common. As I discussed before, it's to be expected. Libraries are going to want to show what they've got. And you can see in this picture here, one of the most popular subjects of Orkney's Instagram posts is their Bussy Muck Bus Face, I believe he's called, and that always gets a lot of likes. but yeah, in terms of achieving an increase in like-based engagement, the hashtags issues, actually they failed to generate an improvement, unfortunately. The post within the diagnostic Orkney dataset returned an average of 286 likes per post, while the therapeutic dataset saw an average of 206. So there was actually a drop in likes. So I apologize to John at Orkney for that short period of time where I damaged the amount of likes that he got. Yeah, the deficit of likes is quite a considerable proportion. And it could reflect that the tags actually did the opposite of what we wanted them to do. Another explanation for this, though, could be they didn't post any kind of video content in that time. So, and obviously having the views accounting as likes, that kind of boosts the numbers considerably in the diagnostic set. So that could be an explanation. So data did show some positives, though. There was a really strong correlation between emotive type hashtags. So they're the ones that have got like, you know, I love this, like this. There's a really strong connection between those, and then engagement, specifically comments. I went into this kind of looking to analyze the amount of likes more than anything, and then ultimately along the way, I realized that the comments is where the real value is, the real engagement is. And Orkney actually, they do really well in terms of generating comments from their users. They have a lot of fans worldwide. It's not just their community that they serve. They have a lot of people who actively comment a lot of the time. So yeah, that's definitely something that if I was to repeat, I would consider more and kind of look more closely at. And another success was the branding hashtags. Again, they seem to generate quite a lot of likes and engagement. Sorry, Dina, could you just skip to the next slide? So I'm going to be quick on this one because I don't want to end on a negative note. Study limitations. So I've mentioned a bunch of time. It was a really limited time frame, and it felt like trying to cram a lot of ideas into a short space. And I would love the opportunity to spend more time on it. A manual data collection. Obviously, like I said, I did not use any kind of analytics tools. It was just me and Microsoft Excel battling it out for a long time. And I wouldn't love to relive that. Also, another issue is that with the coding schemas, there was no overlap. I didn't say, you know, oh, you can have one post being two type of categories. No, it was just you could only pick one category, and it is quite interpretive. So like this picture here that Orkney uploaded, you would look at that and say, oh, you know, that's probably placemaking, that's showing the library, the atmosphere of the library. But then if you were to read the caption, I don't know if anyone can see that. I'm not going to read it out because it's a little bit naughty, and I don't want to lower the tone, but it's definitely humorous, and it's definitely a humanizing post. And I'll take a moment to say, like, that really eased the passing of having to work on a master's dissertation, is how fun and lighthearted all of the Orkney Instagram posts are. That was a delight. Yeah, so as I said before as well, quantifying views as equivalent to likes on video posts was a huge mistake. I can't really think of how I would combat that going forward, but there has to be some other way because it just skews the data too much. And yeah, there's multiple success factors. So I can hypothesize that, you know, as I said before, posts with more hashtags on got more likes. I can't definitively say that they've liked it because there's more hashtags, which has brought more kind of views onto it. I can't. It's kind of more like you know, indicative of. And Dina, if you could just go on to the next slide, please. So conclusions and recommendations. So I'm biased. I think that this is a really valuable study, and I think that there's so many different places that you could go with it. It really highlighted the value of emotive and branding. You know, folksonomy is associated with library accounts, that's for sure. But this whole study was just this presentation is the tip of the iceberg of my study, and then the study is just the tip of the iceberg of everything that kind of needs to be discovered with it. Multiple action research cycles absolutely need to be conducted. to get a more conclusive view of how libraries could use these hashtags. I feel like you could take this and, you know, if you did enough cycles on it, then you could write a framework for libraries. The amount of libraries who I spoke to when I was trying to find a library to collaborate with, the amount of libraries I spoke to, and they would say, yeah, we have an Instagram account, but we just don't know what to do with it. So I think there's a real space there to help libraries in that situation. Another option, dare I say it, is to take it to what is referred to as the other app by Instagram users. That's TikTok. Obviously, TikTok is hugely successful, is super popular, and Book Talk is really popular on TikTok. So you could apply this kind of study to that community as well, and to just see if that differs at all. But yeah, so sorry, I have ranted for so long. I know, Dina, were you coming on to tell me that I have to stop?
Yes, unfortunately, we won't have time for questions, but it was very, very interesting, Chloe. So we'll see it towards the end if we have some time for questions. So please keep them if you have them. But just a comment from me. So I really love the idea of folksonomies being punk and anti-authoritarian. So I'll leave it there. Thank you so much for this, Chloe. And we'll quickly move on to our next presenter, just to keep our time, but hopefully we'll have some more time for questions at the end. You also have some really nice comments in the chat area, so please have a look at them. And the references, of course, if anyone wants to check any of these works that were mentioned today. So thank you, Chloe. Now we're ready to move on to Tricia. Tricia White, who is presenting on facing the challenge of embedded digital ethics in organizational culture. Tricia is doing a Master's of Business Administration, specialized in information systems governance and strategy. And an associate Tricia is an information technology manager with the Irish Museum of Modern Art, which is very interesting. And also Tricia has an honors degree in media management and production, and also several other diplomas in media production, networking technology, databases, and SQL and graphic design. I'm very impressed, Tricia. So over to you to find more about your research here, and then open up the floor for questions. So I'll move on to the slides.
Morning or good afternoon, everybody. As Dina introduced me there, I'm Tricia, and I'm a frightening one day away from completing my master's, specialising in information systems strategy and government with Edinburgh Napier. So for the next 15 minutes or so, I'll give you an overview of my dissertation project concerning digital ethics. Can we move on to the next slide, please, Dina? So as Dina mentioned, by day, I am the IT manager with the Irish Museum of Modern Art, and IMA is Ireland's National Cultural Institution for Modern and Contemporary Art. We are housed in this beautiful building here in the Royal Hospital, Kilmainham, and this building is Ireland's oldest classical building, and it's arising out of this juxtaposition that it creates between the old and the new that leads us to manage a really ambitious programme. And it's not just about exhibitions and commissions from Irish and international artists, but we also have a really rich engagement and learning programme. We host many music festivals, conferences. We're a very common film location, so you might even recognise the building. And we place a lot of emphasis on our community-based initiatives. We have a number of programmes running for primary, secondary and third level education programmes. We run programmes for people with dementia, a lot of community-based programmes, but we place particular attention on underrepresented groups within our community. So a lot of what we do as an arts organisation really is to promote discussion and, more importantly, provoke discussion about a lot of often really difficult discussion topics. And it's this collision of practice that has led me towards digital ethics. Next slide, please, Dina. So as part of the museum's aim to become a radically public space, sorry, just looking at the slide here, a little bit of information didn't transfer across. So this is just about why digital ethics and what led me in this direction. So part of our aim as a museum is to be a radically public space, and we're starting a project and building the foundations for a major global learning and research centre. So we have a collection of about 4,500 artworks, but what we also have is a paper archive of about 5 million documents. And over the next 5 years, we're planning on digitizing about 2 million of those documents and making them publicly available. And again, like many organizations, the COVID-19 pandemic changed a lot of the structure about the way we work internally as an organization. And we've decided to continue that hybrid working environment. And that forces a lot of other changes on the way we work, changes around our data management, about how we access that information, about security and about governance. But it also really depends on high levels of trust between the organization and its staff. So during this change process for us, we spent a lot of time consulting with our peers in other national cultural institutions, other departments and other government bodies that we work closely with. And I've become really aware of how differently each organization has dealt with these changes. And in particular, that some bodies are much more intrusive in their monitoring of how people work and what they do when they're not physically in that office space. And I found myself thinking about the boundaries on the points at which organizations are justified in this behavior, particularly on things like work hours and social media and the difference between that private and public persona or professional persona that we have. And that drew me specifically into the implications of digital ethics on civil and public service bodies. Next slide, please, Dina. So this is the problem that I looked specifically at, and that's the abrupt societal changes that have been brought about by the pandemic and the way that has accelerated and changed digitalization plans, digitalization plans, digital transformation, and everything surrounding digital. And those rapid changes haven't left us time really to establish healthy, ethical and moral behaviours in the way we work and behave on those platforms. And this gives rise to a lot of ethical implications surrounding issues like neurodiversity, inclusion, accessibility, hate speech, disinformation, and personal agency. So I think ethics ultimately affects everyone in the workplace. It affects us as a citizen, as a software developer, as an educator, as a student, as a parent. And that technology has become so pervasive that it permeates almost every aspect of our lives. And what I wanted to build around this is supporting structures that could filter down at grassroots level and guide users in that behaviour and place emphasis on those moral behaviours that we want to include, and just create something that would support that in the workplace. Next slide, please, Dina. So these are the 3 specific project objectives that I set out of that. The first is to critically examine the academic literature already in place and just provide clarity in what it means to be digitally ethical. The second was to establish the importance in particular in state and semi-state organisations within the Republic of Ireland. And the third was to propose that framework to guide these codes of ethics and conducts within these bodies. Next slide, please, Dina. So this was the methodology I set myself to achieve those things. The first one really is quite self-explanatory, and that's covered as part of the literature review. And I'll give you a brief overview of that because it feeds very directly into the way I analyse the findings from the subsequent sections of the project. The second was to survey current serving civil and public service employees, and that helps establish really the importance of digital ethics in all organisations, what they understand. So I sent out a questionnaire to a group, a civil service public civil service managers group, IT managers group, and they answered a questionnaire for me. And then from a subsection of the respondents from that, I sat down and did one-to-one interviews to further analyse it. And then I used, based on the literature review, I used both inductive and deductive coding techniques to garner and analyse the information provided there. So based Then on the findings from both the literature review and the survey, I visualized a framework and extracted the ethical intentions of Irish government digital strategy documents, and I aligned those with each of the ethical pillars that came out. So I had one surprise addition then to the end of my project. I wasn't planning it initially in the methodology, but it worked out really nicely. And that was what I discovered in the literature review was a number of other documents from other countries. And it coincided really well with my comparison of Irish strategy documents, because they were issued by governments in these countries. And I was able to use that as a benchmark. And that was a real bonus to the project, because it means I had a direct comparison to compare the two different types of documents and how the different attitudes each government has towards digital ethics within their digitization documentation. Next slide, Dina. So to start with, we need to understand what digital ethics is. And that really formed the basis of my initial literature review. And we can see through the history of digital ethics that it's changed in terminology a lot over the years. We've gone from initially cyber ethics to computer ethics to information ethics, and now it's generally referred to as digital ethics. And what I found really curious was the first suggestion of these impending ethical issues that would arise from technology first came to us over 200 years ago. Long before the advent of computers and technology, or computing technology anyway. And that was with Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. And that kind of challenged us to think in new ways about those intersections of science and ethics and responsibility. So as you can see here from this slide, these two primary definitions above us are both from consultancy firms. And I found that really challenging from the literature review, that a lot of the information there was coming from sources outside of academia. So it's a subject, it's extremely popular. You will find thousands and thousands of peer-reviewed papers, particularly in emerging technologies like AI and big data, the metaverse, augmented and virtual reality. But a lot of this documentation is also coming from other places at EU level, perhaps the European Data Protection Commissioner. There's an ethics advisory group. There's a European group on ethics and science and new technologies. And still through all that, nobody's kind of come forth with a common understanding and definition of what digital ethics is. And what we can see here is that two consultancy firms are already starting to step into that breach and create a bridge between that academic understanding of what digital ethics is and means and how it's applied, and the need for an actual practice-driven understanding and applying it in organizations. Next slide, please, Dina. So the ambitious goal of digital ethics really is to maximize the value of digital technology and to minimize the negative effects and harms that may arise from that. So although the common definition has not been forthcoming from anywhere except for perhaps the consultancy firms, what has come forth, particularly out of the academic research, is this table of principles that encapsulate what it means to be digitally ethical. And quite a lot of work has been done here from numerous academics, where they have looked at all the research and all the literature, and they've categorized it and synthesized it into these 5 core principles or pillars of digital ethics, as I refer to them, and these subsidiary principles that fall below that. So this particular work is from Sarah Becker et al. It's 2022, and it was used to create a code of digital ethics for a pharmaceutical company. So there's a lot of work here, particularly academics. Luciano Floridi is probably the most prolific author on the subjects, and they've all looked at that dispersed nature and understanding of ethics and brought it together. And it's been supported by numerous other papers. It's consistent. They're all saying the same thing. These are the principles and values that keep coming forward that determine what is digitally ethical within any organization. Next slide, please, Dina. So the survey findings are what came out my own understanding when speaking to my peers and colleagues in the civil and public service. is that this lack of common definition really contributes to the understanding of digital ethics in the workplace and what needs arise from being digitally ethical. All the respondents really displayed that lack of understanding, and they had trouble with how that differs from prescriptive policies and procedures, particularly in relation to things like legal compliance and GDPR. And they felt everything was just, it was looked up after. There was nothing else they felt they needed to think about beyond that. And these prescriptive policies and procedures, they really contain the things of this is what you can do and this is what you can't do. They don't help you guide you through something when there is perhaps a conflict and a privacy issue that may be included in GDPR, but there's also an access issue that's playing at the other side. And this is what digital ethics really hopes to serve, is to provide and fill the gap between all those different things. And because of that, there was really an inability to, either due to lack of awareness or understanding, to embed strong behaviours within organisations. So it really doesn't help guide staff on issues such as how the introduction of new platforms can isolate those with low levels of digital literacy, or perhaps biases that might be brought about by the automation of information-based tasks. And as a result, there is no ownership of these new ethical challenges. There's no one to raise these issues with. There's no one to have those conversations and discussions with. There's no oversight of how these organisations should manage it. And there's no path for redress if something happens and that you need to do something or correct an action. Next slide, please, Dina. So based on that, particularly on the academic findings in those pillars, I built this visual of how they would look and how an organisation can take their plans and their values and structures and documents and use that to build a framework specifically and bespokely for them, focusing on the pillars and principles that are more important to them. And I used two Irish digital strategy documents listed here. I used Harnessing Digital and Connecting Government 2030. These are both documents released in 2022. And the challenge I found with the documentation covering digital strategy and digitalization and digitalization is that they really weren't explicit in their ethical intentions. Although there was lots of information about how they wanted to be environmentally friendly and the types of security measures and controllability and access and things like that, they really didn't align them with any kind of ethical and moral practices. So you'll notice in particular that one of the pillars, the pillar of autonomy, and two of the principles, impartiality and responsibility, we actually couldn't find anything in the documentation that we could definitively say belonged in these pillars, which I found really, really interesting. And really the only mention of being ethical or ethics in the documentation was in relation to AI. And there was very little reference otherwise to any kind of ethical behaviours or morals within it. Next slide, please, Dina. So moving on from that, I found documents from the Scottish Government. And in particular, there were two particular documents that came forward the same, matched identically almost to the Irish documents. Dina, next slide, please. And these are, they were listed there on the slide. I'll tell you what they were. A Changing Nation, How Scotland Will Thrive in a Digital World, which was released in 2021, and Building Trust in the Digital Era, Achieving Scotland's Aspirations as an Ethical Digital Nation in 2022. And as you can see just there from the name of the documents, they're very different in the way they're expressly and implicitly ethical in what they want to do as a digital nation. And they carried out the building of these documents in this strategy very different to the way the Irish government was. And they invited community involvement and a range of stakeholders across the community and asked them to prioritise the matters and focused on the matters that are at the forefront of ethical concerns. And that in itself is an action that promotes digital ethics. It promotes the pillars of beneficence, non-maleficence, transparency. It's a very open and discursive process. Next slide, please, Dina. And this is what they built from it. Again, sorry, there's information missing from this slide, but it's the Objects of Digital Trust framework. And on this, they're building all the principles and priorities that means digital transformation across their services. And what's here really evident in this documentation is that this building of ethical resources and understanding is also building trust in all these areas that need to be covered by government legislation. Next slide, please, Dina. So the final piece of the project, and this is about embedding digital ethics in the organization. So the first four are probably quite obvious: training, championing, assigning responsibility, and cooperation. But what was interesting was this final piece, which is really important in being digitally ethical and being ongoingly digitally ethical, is this notion that it is born out of this rapidly changing technological landscape. And it needs to be a process, it needs to be open, it needs to be constantly expanding and based on behaviour, and we need to keep it as a process alive. So it's not just about writing a policy and a code and a procedure and a tick box exercise. It's really changing organizational behaviours and the way they think and the way they feel comfortable raising those issues and behaviours throughout the organization. Next slide, please, Dina. And these were the key outcomes of the project. The absence of definition, which keeps reoccurring throughout the themes, and that because of that, it's almost impossible to really embed strong behaviours among staff and create ownership. The second one is that the Irish government in particular has avoided being definitive in their ethical motives. It's really unclear whether this is intentional or whether they just haven't thought about it. But what is important is that they become more intentional about digital ethics so they can secure the trust of citizens and organisations that they're involved with. And that Scotland provides much more clarity about their ethical intentions to support the digital economy. It's really explicit about the need to build trust. And while the Scottish framework isn't all-encompassing, it doesn't include all the same things that the academic works and the academic frameworks recommend, but it is an exemplar of the way it needs to be done in order to create and embed ethical behaviours amongst everyone. Next slide, please, Dina. So just to focus this a little bit more, I did a bit of background for the last couple of days on how digital ethics in particular would affect the LIS sector. And these were 4 examples I came up with. The first one is around cultural sensitivities and the conflict between perhaps professional values, such as the provision of access to information, and obligations and sensitivities within society. And it just, digital ethics tends to raise its head in something where there is a conflict of interest between different areas of society. And it's about creating structures in place, putting the structures in place so we can have that discord and we can negate some of the harms. Ethics in itself, or digital transformation in itself, is intended to break down barriers. So we don't want to find ways in which we create more barriers. So the censorship, we look at issues like the fact that books traditionally may have been banned in certain areas or territories. And again, with technology breaking down those walls and those barriers, you're changing that nature of censorship where there may be access where there wasn't before. And whether we have an obligation towards controlling that access in some way. And while digitalization can be a major benefit to some service users, other types of disability can be negatively impacted when we do that. It can create those issues from users from low socioeconomic groups who can't afford devices, or those with low levels of digital literacy is one that has come up quite a lot. And the last one there I've included is intellectual property, and that may be like things like meeting demands for users where there's no disabilities provision in copyright legislation that gives you the leeway to do that. I came across this piece in particular by Ferguson et al. It's a few years old, but it gives some very specific examples of issues that have arisen in the LIS sector that has caused ethical conflict and ethical queries. So if anybody wants to refer to that paper, it might be useful for you. At the last, next slide, please, Dina. So this is just an overview of the limitations and recommendations of my own study. And in general, just that constantly changing state in the landscape of technology is going to be a limiting factor. Something like ethics, it's normative by nature, so it's very responsive and reactive to those technologies and things around them. So that's always going to be a challenge. What I've included here in the second section is some recommendations, and I particularly like these three notions of ethics that have started to become apparent, and that's ethics by design, ethics of use, and ethics of society. And they talk about those ethics that kind of appear in different levels of the process, from the development of a platform to the adoption of the platform at the very end. And I find that quite intriguing, that there's a lot there that could be covered. Last slide, please, Dina. So thank you for listening. I'm conscious of the fact that I've really just glossed over a lot of the detail of what the project goes into, and it's quite like technology itself, it's quite pervasive. So if anybody has any questions.
Thank you so much, Tricia.
Thank you.
Please do add them into the chat area so that Tricia, you can engage throughout the session actually, and the same goes to Chloe. So if anyone has questions, please feel free to add them, and then you can both look at them, but also we will see if we have time at the end. Very interesting, and I saw some connections with my own research in terms of looking at the objects of trust. The report of the Scottish Government that you mentioned, that mentions technology, usefulness, privacy, fairness, transparency, the responsibility of individuals, users, organizations, institutions, everybody really in society to safeguard ethics. Very, very interesting. Thank you so much. And I love the visuals, Tricia. So very, very beautiful presentation. So we're going to move on to the next and final presentation, which is slightly different. So we have with us Hye Johnston from Robert Gordon University. Hye is currently a master's in information science, information library studies course, and she's currently actually embarking on her research. And I have intentionally invited Hye because I wanted to really learn more about experiences of people who are in different stages of research. So this research is only starting now, and the topic is creating zine-making resources for Scottish librarians working with young people. And I should say that so far we had very digital topics, but now we're moving on to a topic that is all about DIYing in libraries, crafting and developing and being creative and creating within the library environment, using any material you may have. So that's the interest of that. And Hye will also share with you the development of different ideas, which I'm going to leave you with after this presentation, but it's a slightly different presentation. So it's a recording we're going to play now. So we listen to the recording of Hye's proposal, and then invite any questions you may have, and please do post them, because Hye is very much looking forward to ideas. There's still space for development of your topic. Okay, so let's share that. So you can see the presentation now, hopefully. So we can play that.
Hi, Fiona Johnston, and studying for my Masters in Library and Information Science. This is my progress presentation for my practical research project. In it, I will explore the context and rationale of the project, important literature, and my proposed methodologies and structure. In 2022, the Scottish Government released the Children and Young People's Mental Health in Scotland report, which states that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a particularly negative impact on children and young people's mental health and well-being, with the impact exacerbated for those groups already at risk of poorer mental well-being. Those groups include those in Scotland's most deprived areas, care-experienced children and young people, lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender and intersex individuals, and adolescent girls. Within the current context of increased focus on early intervention and support for the emotional health and well-being of young people in Scotland, zine making is another way in which our libraries can be of service to their patrons. This also provides further evidence of the library's worth and value in a landscape where funding and local authority support can seem to question and undermine this. Introducing zine making into the library can be of benefit to young people. The creative act of making zines could help with emotional and mental health and well-being by easing stress and anxiety, allowing expression of self and creating an embodied community. These workshops could also be of benefit to the libraries themselves. They allow us to reach new, diverse and possibly underserved patrons, and the subsequent zines are a valuable resource as a community archive. Lastly, the possibilities inherent in zine making are multitudinous, and therein lies both their beauty and their barrier. If a librarian is new to the concept of zines and zine making, and doesn't feel confident leading a creative workshop generally or a zine making workshop specifically, how do we make it as easy as possible for them to introduce this valuable offering to their library? The initial exploratory literature search has revealed academic research and discussion around zines and zine making. However, these primarily look at zines as artefact rather than zines as process. My current stage of the literature review is threefold, drilling down from broad theoretical lens to project specifics. Firstly, embodied learning, materiality and lifelong kindergarten. Examining the pedagogies of embodied learning, materiality and the theory of lifelong kindergarten to argue the value of analogue zine making within a digital world. In Making Matters, Mary Gullickson examines the lens of embodied learning, which looks to debunk the lingering bias that cognition is a mental activity somehow separated from the body. She then analyses an analogue making process through this lens as evidence that practical making activity is important for cognitive, behavioural and socio-cultural development. Second, creative activities and making as beneficial for mental health. In Creativity, Boredom Proneness and Wellbeing in the Pandemic, researchers used data collected during the pandemic to establish that people who engaged more in everyday creative activities also reported higher levels of self-esteem, optimism and positive affect. Further, in Effects of Creativity on Social and Behavioural Adjustment in 7 to 11-year-old children, it is found that results suggest that facilitating engagement with creative activities could be explored further as a way of reducing levels of instability and maladjustment at the onset of adolescence. Finally, looking specifically at zines as tools for positive change. In Zines as an Outreach Staple, Tess Wilson asks, will this event allow for creative freedom? Will teens feel as if they can express themselves through this craft or activity? Could a teen lead this workshop if they felt comfortable? And the answer with zine making is yes. We have evidence of girls and zine making as a form of resistance, zines for social justice, resisting body norms with zines, zines as empowerment, zines as a method for creating an embodied community. The aim is to create accessible online resources for Scottish librarians working with young people. And the objectives are 1. To research how zine making could be of value. 2. To examine current knowledge and attitudes. It is anticipated that librarians working in libraries featuring makerspaces or that already feature zine making activities or zine collections will have greater awareness of DIY culture in general and zines in particular. 3. To consider both librarians and young people's needs in resource development. And finally 4, to create resources of value and use to librarians. The exact form of these resources will be informed by the research and design process. However, it is likely to be online and open source to ensure that they are as accessible as possible to librarians across Scotland. The target user group is Scottish librarians working with children and young people. This covers librarians working in public libraries or school libraries. Considering that access to the user group will be an essential component of resource development, it is noted that within the Scottish education system, school librarians working in primary schools are much rarer. Therefore, for the purposes of this practical research project, I will focus on young people aged 11 to 18 and the specific population of public and secondary school librarians. Methods of data collection will evolve throughout the resource development process and be inherently mixed method, qualitative and quantitative. As can be seen from this proposed project structure, the literature research and initial survey to librarians can occur concurrently, with data from each being merged for the prototype stage. These surveys will establish current knowledge and preconceived attitudes regarding zines and zine making, whilst providing a self-selected group of participants for further research and pilot programmes through opt-in. Note will be made of demographic characteristics such as gender, geographical location, years working in libraries, in order to gain useful quantitative data. Qualitative data for the survey will primarily be closed-ended questions for ease of analysis, with 1 or 2 open questions for valuable data. First-person qualitative data will then be collected through observation during pilot programmes, along with post-workshop interviews. Information from these interviews will be compared with the data from the initial survey to provide evidence of any progress or change. This aggregated data will then feed into the iterative resource design process. Sample techniques used will include use of gatekeepers, snowballing, and the use of user-specific lists and SILIP groups. The possibility of researchers' bias will be mitigated by ensuring breadth of survey group consisting of librarians both known and unknown to the researcher, and by anonymising the surveys before analysing responses. The complexity of this mixed methods design means that time could potentially be a big challenge, and project management of the timeline will be essential to success. Next steps. Further evaluation of literature to establish if theories of embodied learning are a useful lens and to gain further evidence of mental health benefits. Further research into methods of quantitative and qualitative data analysis for best research design. Evaluation of the zine-making resources currently available to establish best practice and potential gaps. Finally, establishing a realistic timeline for the entire research and design process.
Okay, so that was Fi's presentation. Apologies, I don't know if it was on the lower side. Could you all hear it okay? I hope you could all hear it okay. So we have Fi with us today to really for the audience for any questions. So please let Fi know if you have any questions now. For me, it's a very interesting project because, as I said, we're moving now. We experienced everything with the pandemic, and now we're moving back to really thinking about not only the digital world, but also, like the normal world, you can say. And of course, we learned a lot from the pandemic about digitizing services, the challenges we had and all that. But now also we want, a lot of the time we feel like we want to connect in real life. And I think that zine making is one of those activities that allow you to, connect with other people. It's a hands-on activity, be creative, and also, for the purposes of health and well-being. It does make complete sense to me. But let's see from the audience, do we have any questions coming through? We do have about the other presentations as well, but so we have a few things in the chat area. First of all, I'll just go through the previous things that were mentioned, that you love the range of research undertaken, so thank you very much for this very kind comment. We do have a question for Joy that we will go back to it, but also Jimmy saying that for phys research, it sounds really exciting. Definitely love zines as a form of social action. Just wondering how you plan on delivering the final guides online, Fee.
Hi, I'm just on a public library Wi-Fi. Love public libraries. So if I start to cut out or if there's any problems, just let me know. The final plan will definitely be dictated to a degree by the extremely complex iterative design process. But there are certain things which are very important to me, which is that it's as accessible as possible and as open access as possible. So I envisage creating a website or an online portal of some kind so that there's a central point that any librarians or anyone who works with children and young people can then access that as easily as possible. Does that answer the question, Jamie?